Serafina had learned to breathe quietly before she learned to walk. That was what her mother always said, not as a compliment, as a warning. The woman who raised her, a small, tired woman named Leora, used to press 2 fingers to the side of Serafina's neck when she was a child and whisper, "Softer, quieter, you must never let them hear it." Serafina never fully understood what "it" meant until she was 17 years old, hiding inside a cellar wall, while men with torches walked through the house above her head. That night, she understood everything. Now she was 24, and she lived a life so deliberately small that most people forgot she existed by the time they walked past her. She rented a single room above a spice shop in the border town of Ashfen. She worked at a small herbal apothecary on the east side of the market square. She wore her dark hair pinned up and covered with a plain linen hood. She paid for everything in cash. She kept no photographs, no letters, no objects that carried a name. The few people who knew her at all called her Sarah. Her real name was Serafina Ione Valdres. She had not said it aloud in 7 years. The name meant nothing to most people now. The history books that once carried it had been quietly removed, replaced, or destroyed. The family that wore it had been killed in a single night 22 years ago at their mountain estate, when Serafina was only 2 years old and small enough to be hidden inside a space between 2 cellar walls, while the world she was born into was taken apart around her. The House of Valdres had been the oldest of the royal wolf bloodlines. They had ruled not through armies, but through something far rarer, a biological gift that the scholars of the old world called the auric pulse. Every member of the Valdres line carried it in their blood, and it expressed itself most powerfully through the heartbeat. A Valdres heartbeat resonated at a frequency that no ordinary ear could catch, but that every wolf could feel. It calmed animals, it steadied men mid-shift, and in the rarest recorded cases, only 4 in documented history, it had the power to permanently tether a powerful alpha's beast, creating a bond so complete that neither wolf nor human could be separated from it without breaking something essential. The Grey Warden Coalition had understood exactly what that meant, and so they came in the night. Serafina spent 15 years after the massacre, learning, in small and painstaking ways, how to suppress what she carried, how to breathe shallowly, how to keep her pulse low and dull and unremarkable, indistinguishable from any other woman in any other town. It was exhausting work. It required constant attention, the way a person might have to concentrate to keep from blinking, but she had done it for 7 years without a single mistake, and she had come to believe that she could do it for the rest of her life if she had to. She almost made it. The market in Ashfen was busy on a Thursday morning. Serafina had been up since before dawn, sorting dried moonflower and thistle root, and she was tired in a way that lived behind her eyes. She had not slept well. She had been thinking about Leora, who had died 4 years ago in a small village to the north, and sometimes, when Serafina thought about Leora, she forgot, for a few moments, to be careful. She was walking through the square with a basket on her arm when she let herself breathe, really breathe, full and deep, the way she never allowed herself to breathe in public, for approximately 30 seconds. 30 seconds. She felt it the same moment he did. A wolf locked onto her heartbeat from across the square. She knew the sensation. She had felt it twice before in 7 years, both times from ordinary pack wolves, who were simply near enough to catch the frequency. Both times she had suppressed immediately, and the wolves had lost the thread within seconds, confused and unsure of what they had sensed. This was not that. This was something that locked onto her heartbeat, the way a key drops into a lock, complete, certain, and not letting go. She turned. He was standing 20 feet away, dressed in dark travel leathers with no insignia and no crown, but carrying the unmistakable weight of someone who had never in his life needed either of those things to be recognized. He was tall, broad across the shoulders, with silver-gray eyes that in the morning light looked almost the color of a wolf mid-shift. He had stopped walking entirely. His 3 guards had stopped with him, their hands moving toward weapons out of trained instinct, scanning the square for a threat. There was no threat. There was only Serafina, standing still with a basket of herbs, her hood pushed slightly back, staring at the Alpha King of Veldrath as his ancient and barely leashed wolf went completely and utterly silent inside him for the first time in 4 years. She ran. She dropped the basket and took 3 back alleys and a rooftop crossing she had memorized on her 3rd day in Ashfen. She was inside her flat, with the bolt drawn, and her go-bag pulled out from under the floorboards within 4 minutes. She had done this before: the packing, the counting of emergency coin, the mental rehearsal of the route north. She had done it 3 times in 7 years, whenever something felt dangerous enough to move on. She opened the window to check the street below. One of the king's guards was already at her building's entrance. And Calder Morn, the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf ruler on the continent, a man who had not left the high keep of Veldrath for anything smaller than a war in the past 4 years, was standing in the middle of the street below, not looking at her window. He was looking at the wall beside it, as though he could hear her heartbeat through the stone. She sat on the floor with her back against the door and her go-bag in her lap, and stayed there for a long time, listening to him stand in the street, and knowing, in the part of her that had been raised on 7 years of hard experience, that this was the end of the quiet life she had built. He knocked at her door 20 minutes later. He had dismissed his guards. She heard only one set of footsteps on the stairs, and then a single, quiet knock. Not the knock of a king, not the knock of an authority demanding entry, but the knock of a person who was not sure of their welcome, and was asking rather than demanding. She did not answer. He spoke through the door in a low, even voice. He said he was not going to tell anyone. He said he did not fully understand what he had heard, only that it had stopped something in him that had been running out of control for a very long time. He said that was all he wanted to understand, and that he would leave if she told him to. She believed him. She was not sure why she believed him, except that liars, in her experience, did not dismiss their guards before knocking. And because something in her, something tired and very old and kept silent for 7 years, recognized the sound of a person who was telling the simple truth, she opened the door. He came in and sat down in the one chair in her small, herb-scented room, and she sat on the edge of the bed, and they looked at each other for a moment in the way that 2 people who have both lost enormous things sometimes do, carefully, without pretense. She did not tell him who she was, not yet, but she could not fully suppress the pulse with him in the room. He was too present, too still, and the nearness of his wolf, quiet as it was, quieter than she suspected it had been in years, made her own heartbeat want to lift and reach, the way a sound wants to be heard after a long silence. Every time it did, he noticed. He did not say anything when it happened. He only watched her with those silver-gray eyes, as though he were hearing something he had no words for yet. She told him she worked at the apothecary. He told her he had come to Ashfen for a trade dispute. They both understood that neither of these things was what the conversation was actually about. 3 days later, he was still in Ashfen. His guards had said nothing, loyally and without expression, as the 2-hour administrative visit stretched into its 4th morning. Calder had told himself, and apparently anyone who asked, that there were additional matters requiring his attention. There were no additional matters. On the 4th morning, before dawn, 2 men in dark clothing were waiting for Serafina outside the apothecary when she arrived for her early shift. She knew what they were before they moved. She had been watching for people like them for 7 years. The collars they carried, suppressant collars, built specifically to dampen the auric pulse and make a Valdris Royal possible to transport without her frequency alerting every wolf within a mile, told her who had sent them before they said a single word. The Grey Warden Coalition had not stopped looking for her. The fight was fast and ugly. She broke one man's wrist and took a knife across her left forearm before the second man got the collar to within inches of her neck, and she was out of options and running out of time when something enormous came through the wall of the market stall behind her captors. Not through the door. Through the wall. The wolf that landed in the alley was the largest she had ever seen. Silver gray, ancient-looking, with eyes that were still somehow recognizably his, and locked onto her with a focus that made the 2 Grey Warden men understand, in the last clear moment they had, that they had made a very serious mistake. Calder shifted back some minutes later. He was breathing hard. He crouched next to Serafina without speaking, and looked at the cut on her arm and the collar that had fallen to the cobblestones, and his expression was very controlled and very careful in the way that people become controlled and careful when they are working very hard not to show that they are frightened. She looked at him. This king, this wolf, this man who had driven through a wall for reasons he could not yet fully name, and understood that she had run out of quiet. She sat down on the cobblestones of Ashfen in the early morning light, and she told him everything. Not carefully, not with planning or strategy, or the careful management she had applied to every interaction for 7 years. She was tired and bleeding, and she had been carrying this alone since she was 17, and he had just driven through a wall, and she simply spoke. She told him her name, her real name, both parts of it. She told him about the House of Valdres and the Auric Pulse, and what it meant, and why it frightened people with political ambitions, and what had been done to her family when she was 2 years old. She told him about the cellar wall, and Leora's hands, and 7 years of breathing shallowly in towns where no one knew her face. And then she told him the part she had only ever worked out on her own, quietly, over years. The Grey Warden coalition had not destroyed the Valdres line purely for political power. They had destroyed it because the old treaties, the ones that had been quietly negotiated in the years before the massacre, had been moving toward binding the House of Valdres to the line of the Alpha King. A Valdres royal paired with a king-level alpha wolf. The scholars believed that such a pairing would have produced a bond unlike anything recorded in history, stable, permanent, and utterly unbreakable. The Grey Warden had understood exactly what that would mean for their own ambitions. They had not been afraid of one royal. They had been afraid of what two would mean together. Calder was quiet for a long time after she finished. He had known, she could see, pieces of it. He had known that the Grey Warden coalition had a hand in the death of his bonded mate 4 years ago. That was the event that had shattered the careful peace he had built and left his wolf running at the walls of the thing that was supposed to be his own chest. But he had not known why. He had not known what connecting thread ran from his loss to hers, from his wolf's restlessness to the heartbeat of a woman hiding in a border town apothecary. He looked at the suppression collar lying on the cobblestones. Then he looked at her. "My wolf knew your heartbeat before I knew your name," he said. "I don't think that was an accident." She did not answer that. She did not need to. What happened next was not a rescue. Serafina had not survived 7 years alone, by waiting to be rescued by anyone, and she was not about to start. What she agreed to, after a long and practical conversation in the early morning light of Ashfen, was to go to Veldrath, not as a ward, not as a secret, not as a political asset to be managed, but as herself. As Serafina Ione Valdres entered into the public record of the living, acknowledged and documented, and named, in a world that had spent 22 years pretending her bloodline did not exist. The Grey Warden's greatest weapon had always been her absence, her namelessness. The blank space where a royal should have been. She understood, finally, that the most dangerous thing she could do was simply to exist openly. She walked into the high keep of Veldrath beside Calder, on a grey morning 2 weeks later, not one step behind him, and she gave her name to the palace scribe in a clear, unhurried voice. The scribe's hand stopped moving. He looked up at her across his desk. "House Valdres has been listed as extinct for 22 years, my lady." Serafina held his gaze. "Update the record." The last thing the story remembers is not Calder, and not the court, and not the scribe's careful hand beginning to write. It is Serafina alone, at a high window of the keep, looking out over the wide wolf territories in the early light, drawing in a breath, full and deep and unheld, for the first time since she was 17 years old. No suppression, no dampening. Her heart beat exactly as loud as it wanted to be, open to the air, carrying its ancient frequency out across the stone and the trees and the morning. Somewhere far below, a wolf lifted its head and listened.